Welcome to the A to Z Running Podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andy.
And I am Zach. And up next, we kick off our series on recovery methods with a discussion on rest. After that, World of Running updates about a record-setting Millrose Games and Dubai Marathon and more. Welcome back again, and glad to have you with us. We've got some interesting questions coming your way at the end of month Q&A episode, but there certainly is more opportunity for more of your questions. So if you have them, ask them. And to do that, just go to AtoZrunning.com/question. Anything about training, running-related things in life, and whatever else is on your mind.
Right, and even follow-ups maybe to some of our previous conversations. That'd be great too. Speaking of previous conversations, TJ mentioned that the Achilles conversation with Dr. Maskell last week was really helpful as she is trying to understand her own Achilles issues that she's having right now.
That is definitely true, timely and helpful for many. I've talked with a few others who...
Me too.
Yes.
Me too.
Well, that was a great conversation. If you missed it, go back and listen to orthopedic surgeon Dr. John Maskell talking about Achilles and plantar fasciitis problems. And
it's a lot of teaching.
A lot of teaching and a lot of teaching in terms of what you can do, like practical things you need to know.
And what's happening and why it happens. So it just is so great to learn and understand better what's going on in our bodies when it comes to running.
True that. Well, speaking of learning and understanding better things, we are back on live again this week with Rivertown Races to feature a conversation about what training in the winter looks like for a spring race. So if you're running Rivertown Races, it'll be certainly pertinent, and you can get a lot of your questions answered in the live chat. But also, if you're not running Rivertown Races, it's still a pertinent conversation because we're talking about training for any kind of racing in the spring.
Yeah.
Certainly that. And thanks to many of you who tuned in last time despite our technical difficulties. That was a bummer, but we have resolved them in a very simple gesture. Andrew is going to be in studio with us this time representing Rivertown Races, and we'll have a conversation right here from our trusty handy-dandy studio.
We know how to use this setup.
A place that we are certainly all familiar with. And so we'll be able to answer questions live. And if you've got questions, you just jump on Facebook and you type them in the chat and everything. So just go on Facebook, look for the event. It's at the AtoZrunning page. It's also on Rivertown Races page, and it'll be at 8:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday, the 15th of February.
And I do want to mention, because it's kind of hard to find things on Facebook sometimes, you have to go down to more.
I'm raising my hand.
And scroll down to events. So it's under the events tab.
So here's what we did before we came on recording for you here tonight is Zach went on Facebook to try to see if he could find this event.
He went on Facebook.
First, in order to go on Facebook, Zach simply Googled Facebook because I don't really know any other way to do it. And I clicked on the thing, and then I found AtoZrunning's page because Andy happened to already be logged in, which is great because otherwise I'm not sure exactly what I would have done to look for AtoZrunning's page. So however you find pages, find AtoZrunning. And then once we got there, I was like, all right, I see something that says Rivertown Races, and I clicked on it, and Andy's like, nope, that's a story. That's something totally different. And
Well, that's the story. You don't really need to know a whole lot about that, but
the point is, it's an event. Look for the events, and you'll find it.
We have a great topic coming up for you right now.
Here's what we are going to do for the next several episodes with a brief hiatus for the end of month Q&A episode. We're going to unpack all the recovery methods. At least as far as runners are familiar with recovery methods, and basically any other kind of
all with
physical
an
activity.
Asterisk.
All with an asterisk, I guess you could say, because there certainly are many other possible things you could do for recovery. But we're going to cover the big picture methods. We're going to talk about things like the RICE, recommendation that the doctor always gives you when you say I'm hurt, and the doctor says rest, ice, compress, elevate, and it's like, well, how closely have you researched those things, and what do they actually do for me? So we're going to look at them from two lenses. We're going to look at them from the lens of what happens physiologically when you do that thing, and is that the thing you want to have happen when you're trying to recover? And then the other lens is, practically speaking, as runners, what are the things that are most available to us, accessible to us, and effective for our current goals and needs.
And because there's so many variables, of course, we're going to caveat that you should definitely talk to your doctor if you're having something you feel that you need to take rest for.
You could also pretend that I'm your doctor and
No,
send a question
don't do
in,
that. Don't.
and I will pretend to be your doctor and answer. No,
That is ridiculous. Okay.
But we do sometimes have doctors on air. So if you missed Dr. Maskell's episode last week, but seriously, yes, talk to people who actually like take care of you, because we don't actually take care of you, medically speaking. But the consideration here is, what are the things we should know about in terms of recovery methods that might help inform what we should do day-to-day type of stuff, taking care of our bodies, how to respond to when something's not quite what I expected or I'm not feeling quite right, what are my options, all that kind of stuff.
I think the biggest question we get from athletes is, should I rest? And
is that the biggest
what
question?
does it
That
look
might
like?
be.
It could be the biggest question.
Yeah.
And I think other people have asked us besides our athletes, like, should I be resting when this thing happens? Or what should I do when I experience this kind of discomfort? So when to rest? Should we
Not
be
all
fully
rest
resting, or
is
should we
created
be
equal.
modifying? And there's all kinds of questions that are part of this conversation.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean. I thought that it was a fitting comment, and then I realized you were saying more. Not all rest is created equal. That was the point that you were making, Andy. With the question of should I rest is not answerable with yes or no, because it's like yes in this way or no while doing this, or it's just not straightforward. So when to rest has to then include the understanding of what do we mean by rest when we're talking about this. So yeah, we'll address some of that. All right, now keep going. Sorry.
Why we rest? There's so many reasons. Injury, acute, chronic. There's also fatigue. Maybe there's a planned rest day, so there's days off or weeks after races, in between cycles. High stress might cause us to need rest.
Like life busyness. Yeah.
And sickness. And there's
Certainly
probably
that.
more. There's probably more reasons.
Okay, and so then what you have to figure out is you have to figure out, based on what's going on, what should I do in terms of resting? And as Andy said, when is it necessary, to what degree?
Right. And we had Dr. Todd Buckingham on the show, and we talked about losing fitness. And a lot of conversation when it comes to rest is because there is an underlying fear of losing fitness. Now, there is a lot that goes into these conversations, but to understand that if our body is asking us, if we're listening to the signs of our bodies and we're in tune with what's going on, if we take a day or two off, it's fairly inconsequential. Now, if that turns into issues that are larger and more invasive or prevalent, I should say,
Or
then
bad.
The intensity of it is worse. Then there might be fitness loss, but there's like some things to balance there, right? So we want to keep all these things in mind.
And keeping in mind that adaptations occur during a rest period, and so sometimes the rest is necessary to actually improve. Now, of course, the assumption there is day to day. The reason you're not running all day every day is because your body needs to rest a bit to recover and rebuild, which is then training adaptations. So that the first answer is you should be getting enough rest in terms of just like maintaining a common training cycle. You should be getting enough rest in terms of your day-to-day routine so that you don't need larger bouts of rest regularly. The question is, when something goes wrong, you might need to make an adjustment of some kind.
So first I want to talk about maybe some more of the planned, scheduled, like days off and things, and what it looks like between active rest and passive rest.
Yeah, and that's so if it all really has to do with what is going wrong, then that helps us put on the right lens for active versus passive rest, how much rest, or certainly the degree of what I should be doing or not.
So I'm asking, okay, I have a day off each week. Should I completely try to lay down, not do anything? Maybe I'm having some joint stiffness. Rest.
But joint stiffness is not the same thing as a planned day off.
Well, for me, that's kind of just part of my everyday life. Okay, but I'm saying this because active rest is better for me than a passive resting day. So my active rest might just not include a run. Or maybe if it is a run, maybe it's a really, really easy, slow jog. And that is an active rest for my body in order to still get the stimulation of the blood flow and move some blood around. I always like that term. Like, I just got to go move some blood around, get things moving so I can cycle through all the junk and to get myself feeling fresh again.
Yeah, and that's a pretty obvious thing. What blood is doing for us is it's moving the bad stuff out and bringing the good stuff in for pretty much every single functional part of your body. So if that is true, then that means that more blood flow, in almost all circumstances, more blood flow equals faster and better, fuller recovery. So there's no such thing as
junk miles.
No. That's not the point I was going to make.
Okay,
I guess
sorry.
That's true too. But there's no such thing as the need for total rest physiologically in terms of like absolute sedentary. Like that's only the case if moving would break you more. So the idea that, I'm hurt and so I just need to totally rest is a very dangerous premise, because yes, it is true there are some injuries that you have to immobilize and you can't, that's why they put you in walking casts or literal casts at times. But the point is that most running related problems are benefited by increased blood flow. And to get, all of them are, but to get increased blood flow, we have to do something that makes the blood move more. So that's where we start looking at, okay, if I'm resting actively in a kind of recovery or rehabilitative activity, that is in almost every single circumstance a better approach to even the concept of days off training.
Like going for a walk or a light spin, doing something different than running, especially if we
Wrestling
need that
with your kids.
mental break. Sometimes it's a mental thing. Like there's weeks that I do run 7 days a week. Usually I just do an easy run on one of the days. That's just a really simple jog, but it's scheduled as a day off. And I think mentally that's really helpful for me, just because when you get into it, sometimes it feels laborious, and I want it to continue to feel exciting.
Sure.
It doesn't need to, though, because discipline comes even when you don't feel like doing it. But I do think it's helpful for me to be a 6-day-a-week runner, because I feel like mentally it's helpful for me to have a rest day. But I think, walking, playing outside with my kids, getting on the stationary bike and just cycling for a little bit to move the blood around, that's all good active rest.
It keeps the balance. And that's one of the reasons. Let's make I think a fairly uncontroversial statement. All things equal, the best training regimen is every day. Perhaps even more than once a day.
I think that some people find that controversial.
All things are good. Then the best training regimen is daily, multiple times a day. Now, the reason why I can say that confidently is because anyone who has unlimited resources, like in terms of time, in terms of like everything unlimited, chances are, if that person's number one and only goal is to improve their physiological capacity, they're going to be training more than once a day in various capacities. I'm not saying you're running more than once a day every day, but every day of the week, more than once a day, you're doing stuff.
It sounds so intense, Zach.
Yes. Now,
why are you sharing this?
Because that's what the professionals do, right? Why do they do that? It's clearly not breaking them. Well, in most cases, it's not breaking them. They're optimizing things. But so if that's the assumption, that's the best case scenario, then we have to apply our constraints. And our constraints are myriad. And so for most of us, we simply do not have that much time available. So the first constraint is, what is even my reasonable amount of time available? For some people, that's going to be 6 days, 7 days, 4 days of running or training a week. And that's all good. You have to start with what's available to me that is a reasonable, like my life is in balance if I do that. But that's one of the reasons. Now, the two other reasons are, what can my body handle? Because not everybody can handle training 6 or 7 days a week. Some people need to train only 4 or 5 days a week. So what can my body handle? And what can my life stress and other types of outside of physiological capacities handle? So sometimes your limiting factor is not that your body can't do it, but that I simply can't wrap my emotional energy around training more than 4 or 5 days a week. And if that's true, then there you have now your baseline. So when we talk about scheduled days off, the reason we schedule days off in terms of like the plan in an ongoing sense is based off of one of those basic understandings. We don't really use rationale like that's too much training, it will get me injured, unless we have literal proof with that particular individual that, yes, if I train more than X, I tend to have a difficult time staying healthy, which can be the case, of course. As I mentioned, that's one of the constraints. But the point is we start from the assumption of train as much as humanly possible, but that's not possible. So back it up until we get to the what is my available
or what do I want
capacity.
to do?
Right. And that's when I say emotional energies. That's what I'm talking about. What do you want to do that sounds enjoyable to you? Yeah.
So now we're going to shift gears a little bit into how our body physiologically responds to rest.
This is my favorite part.
Yeah, this kind of gives us more of a framework for talking about specific scenarios. So
like
tendons.
what parts of your body do what when you're resting is the key here. Mm-hmm. Okay, go ahead.
So tendons and joints tend to do better with active kinds of rest. They're not great at being immobile.
Well, and the reason why is very straightforward. These things are dense areas and dense tissues that naturally do not get as much blood flow by themselves when they're sedentary. So you need to move them around to get the blood pumping more into those areas.
Mm-hmm. I'll just give you an example. For my hip labrum recovery, I was moving. They had me moving right away. They had Zach moving my leg around in circles for like over an hour every day.
Yeah,
he was moving my leg around. Even when I couldn't do it myself because I had damage to my hip flexors, he was moving my leg around because it needed movement in the joint.
Joints have a very specific type of therapy when they are traumatized, and that is manual manipulation, not automatic, not moving it yourself, but having someone else take the thing and move the joint, depending on which type of joint, lever motion or rolling motion. But the reason for that is because the tissues, if they just sit sedentary, don't get as much blood flow, and as they recover from any kind of traumatized state, especially acute trauma, they recover in a more constrained manner than they were previously. So
scar tissue
they shorten, they build up scar tissue or kind of callus in a way. All of those things are bad. All of those things happen especially to tendons and ligatures, the connective tissues, and especially in and around joints.
Mm-hmm. So eccentric exercise, it's the slow lengthening of a muscle. It's like when you're sitting down or when you're running downhill. It's a muscle contraction that is it's called a negative contraction. But those are good for tendons.
We're extending the muscles. Yeah.
Right. Where like powering up a hill or jumping would be concentric.
Yeah, and you don't want to do that when you're trying to rest.
But the eccentric.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yep. So that's so what the point is then when you're talking about things like tendon related issues, the best kind of rest, unless there is severe acute trauma, and even then, depending on what the acute trauma is, like Annie mentioned, post surgery, the day after, well, not even the day after, later on that day, she's doing
manipulation. I moved my leg around.
But the point is in almost every situation, you're going to get the recommendation of active rest for these types of tissues.
Right. I love what Rob said, who was on our show. He said, "Motion is the lotion."
Motion is the lotion.
Yep.
Right on.
Yep. All right, now we're going to move on to muscles, and I was looking up some research in regards to this, and almost all of muscle injuries are to the hamstrings, adductors, quadriceps, and calf muscles for runners.
Yeah, I mean, those are basically all the muscles that you use when you run.
I guess it's not any upper body mentioned, but it's pretty much lower body.
Yes.
Yep. And 90% of all of sports-related injuries are either contusions or strains, whereas muscle lacerations are uncommon. So we're talking mostly with things that are strains, and that's what we're going to kind of dive into a little bit more. But there are some ruptures and strains that require a short period of complete immobilization. So when it first happens, because there's like a gap in your muscle, and you don't want to extend that gap by over exercising it. However, there's like a balance there because you don't want to immobilize for too long. So as early as possible, you start getting back into some you want a medical professional to advise you on this, but you're going to be doing physical therapy and doing some motions to help you then better heal that muscle strain or rupture.
Yeah, and even so, case in point, I strained some tissues in my shin earlier this year in the fall. And in doing that, the very first solution was a walking boot for about a week. And that's about what you're going to hear. I talked with the doctor about other situations, and it's like basically 5 to 10 days is the most common recommendation for immobilization when it's soft tissue. And it was exactly that. There was an acute period here we got to get past, because every time I would move my ankle, I would have sharp pain. A very specific, poignant, sharp pain. And so that clearly is an acute injury that requires a little bit of recovery, because it's not recovering every time I'm moving my ankle.
Yeah, this research said that immobilization should be restricted to less than a week.
Yep.
Because then the adverse effects of immobility are going to be more prevalent if you have extended amounts of immobilization.
And that's exactly it. Immobilization is a very dangerous thing to do in terms of recovery, because what happens is if you immobilize too long, then you have various effects like atrophying or healing that heals in a negative capacity. So like building up scar tissue as a possible answer there, but that's going to happen almost all the time with certain types of damages. But not just that, but like shortening of tissues. So the problem is if your muscle strain heals in an immobilized state, it's going to heal in a shortened state. And then you're going to have to spend substantial amounts of time re-lengthening that tissue, or you're going to re-injure it very easily.
So the recommendation, of course, would be early mobilization, or as early as possible, or your doctor or physical therapist or medical professional advises of you. And that's a gradual increase back into activity. Of course, we talked about blood supply, and we'll talk about it more as we continue the recovery series, but that's going to help you with the regeneration on a molecular level as well, and get the appropriate molecules for regeneration of that muscle tissue. So then the question is when to return to sport-specific training. And this research suggests the ability to stretch the injured muscle as much as the healthy contralateral muscle is allowing it to do, and the pain-free use of the injured muscle in basic movements.
Emphasis on pain-free. So that's the key when you're in that state of just trying to begin mobilizing. If it hurts, it's bad at that moment in time. Now, we're talking about muscle soft tissue damage. With tendons, that's not always the same answer. So with things like tendons and joints, if it's uncomfortable, that's oftentimes acceptable. For muscles, not so much the case in an acute injury scenario.
So moving on now to cellular and protein synthesis. Well, we're actually going to go specifically to post-marathon and what that does to your body. As one
example, yeah. And the reason why is because there are damages. The more substantial the length of a hard effort, the greater the potential for cellular level damages. And that's where we're basically talking about mitochondria and in terms of when they get extremely fatigued.
Yeah,
it's a problem.
And I guess there's like different levels, and I'm not a scientist. I don't claim to be a biologist, but I guess they're the plasma levels. You have creatine and lipid peroxidation of metabolites, and I guess that they can stay in your system for a really long time, and you need to be able to get back to a more balanced state before you continue in your training. I mean, you probably could, but if you're looking at having a rest period after a really intense marathon, like one that you go very hard and you're feeling completely trashed after, it's better to give yourself the time before you stress your system again. That doesn't mean you can't go for walks or maybe even some jogging, but you're not going to want to stress your system, because you're going to want you want everything to be balanced and to get your body back to homeostasis.
Yeah, so when you have cellular level destruction happening, that's not the right word, but when you need recovery in this capacity, any kind of substantial stress to the system is just going to delay that recovery, and this takes time as it is. We're talking like 2 to 4 weeks for this type of recovery to happen fully. And so as a result, in a scenario where this is the case, you need to keep in mind, I still want to have a degree of active rest where there's still good blood flow happening. I'm still moving the joints and the soft tissues, right? But I shouldn't be trying to stress the system at all until I'm ready to handle it again. But this is the interesting thing about it is we're talking about, in order for this to happen, the effort has to be high enough for long enough for this to happen. Because this is basically an energy system problem is what we're describing here. And so it's when your energy system cannot provide the right types of energy for the full period of time, and it starts giving you energy with bad byproducts. And so that's like things like the lactic acid type of conversation, although there's a lot of funny misconceptions around that. You don't really have like acid going into your muscles necessarily. But the point is there's a number of byproducts from all types of energy sources. And if you're talking about lipids for your energy and fat types of things, then chances are you can sustain large volumes of effort at that level of energy output without seeing any kind of substantial cellular level difficulty. So that's why you get things like ultra marathoners don't necessarily have the problem we're describing that marathoners might have at times. Now, they can still, and they often do, but depending on the degree of effort and for how long it's sustained. So if you do an easy marathon, chances are you're not going to have this problem. If you do a hard marathon, chances are you're going to have this problem every time.
Yeah, and there's also something to be said about taking the rest that you need afterward, because you often will have inflammatory responses. And of course, if everything is out of whack, it increases the potential for injury when you return to running quickly or return to stressing your system too quickly, or infection or sickness, because your body is just not ready to take that on. And so it's still working on repairing the damages that have already been done to your bodies. So to apply more stress just gives more for your body to have to do. So that just makes sense.
Yeah, when we're talking about this type of state, one of the other outcomes is immune system suppression as well. And you know that if you keep up with how running affects immune system, you've read all the stuff of like, it's so unhealthy. Well, it is if you do extremely hard, long efforts frequently, then yes, you're probably going to be getting sick a lot. So that's one of the other layers that takes a little bit of time to fully recover. And all this comes down to basically is if this is the type of problem you're dealing with, then your first priority is rest. And it should be the type of rest where you're not just sedentary on your back all day, but you're not trying to stimulate your system at all until you're fully recovered.
Yeah. Now, finally, this is kind of deviating from the line of conversation, but it's something that
talk about sleep.
Yeah, well, when we think of rest, we often think of sleep, and it's just so beneficial for runners. And I'm going to be brief about this, but I just wanted to remind everyone that sleep is one of those things that helps you in your recovery. So when we talk about rest and we talk about recovery, we have to bring up sleep. And 7 hours for adults is recommended. The study found in individuals who slept less than 8 hours per night on average, there were 70% more likely to report an injury than those who slept 8 hours. That was student athletes. I guess 7 hours is what they suggest for adults. So
well, higher levels of activity tend to require higher volumes of sleep. And keep in mind, if there's one major takeaway about like what's happening when you sleep in terms of recovery, that's so imperative. The biggest thing here is hormone recovery. And so human growth hormone especially is produced during a certain cycle of sleep. But your body's hormone regulatory process is most effective in terms of what it's doing for day-to-day recovery while you're sleeping. So if there's other things you could do when you're awake that could help you recover in some ways that are better, like blood flow and stuff, when you're sleeping, your blood flow is kind of bad because your heart rate's so low, but your hormone recovery is not happening when you're awake. And so yes.
Yeah, and there have been many studies that have shown that increased training load and decreased self-reported sleep ends up in increased potential for injury.
I would never believe it.
It's really one of those things that it seems kind of obvious, but it should be stated. And decreased sleep has been shown to be immunosuppressive and increases susceptibility to upper respiratory infections in particular, which are bad for runners, especially if you're looking at a performance or a big race coming up. You really don't want any kind of respiratory distress. It would kind of stink. We also, like with our perceived stress, and if we have any kind of depressive symptoms, this could actually be exacerbated by sleep deprivation as well. And they have seen in studies that really impacts athletic competition, as you would imagine. All of those things: perceived stress, depressive symptoms, and lack of sleep.
Well, one of the things that tends to happen is lack of sleep produces higher levels of stress at a hormone level again. And when that's happening, we know that things like chronic inflammation tend to be a result of increased stress, specifically because of the hormone release or not release that are happening. And so all of this kind of is like basically pointing to the same thing, which is we need the balance of the training stimulation, we need the balance of rest, we need the balance of sleep. And pretty soon here we're going to talk about in one of our future episodes about the influence of nutrition and hydration on these factors too. But insofar as rest goes, if there's one main message whenever we're talking about this topic, as like just athletes, runners talking with each other about it, the main thing is that I should be looking at what's happening right now and deciding what type of rest or whether or not rest is necessary based off of what's happening in specificity. And so the idea is never, well, I'm just not sure, so I should just take the day off. Because that can be helpful. It certainly can be. But it also may not do a thing to help with the problem. And so the question is, what's going on and what does my body need? Not just my body, my emotions, my life stress and busyness. What do I need to best rest and recover?
And on the flip side, not just bulldozing rest because we feel that we need to get to our destination, our goal more quickly. So all of those things wrapped into conversations that we have to have authentically with ourselves and really be honest with ourselves. One thing I like to ask myself, and I'll leave this as the end of our main topic before we get to the world of running, what can I do today that's going to move me forward tomorrow when it comes to rest? So I have a rest day, and maybe I'm not feeling like a run would be, a jog would be good on this day. Well, what can I do? Can I do the mobility routine? Can I do some yoga? Can I go on a walk in the sunshine? What can I do that will move me forward tomorrow so I can feel better and continuing on my training? So that is our topic today.
First installment in our Recovery Methods series, and get excited because it only gets better from here. Speaking of getting better, we have some exciting updates up next in the world of running. We got a quick A to Z runner update for you over the weekend. Craig, congrats on another marathon, and a great one at that. And the word from Craig is he felt a lot better late stages than he has in some recent races. And so that was just very exciting.
Yeah.
Craig, congrats. Nice work, and excited to see the next one in a few weeks.
Yeah, that'll be great. Millrose Games. You knew we were going to talk about it because so many exciting things happened, starting with the Wanamaker Mile in our conversation. And the men's side.
Oh, goodness.
You
have to watch it.
You got to watch it.
You have to watch, and we say that because you can. If you go on YouTube,
embed it.
you can.
Well,
you can
I can also embed it.
Yes. So you go to AtoZrunning.com, find the episode, and you can watch it because it's one of those races that it doesn't seem real. Like, are they really running that fast? They just make it look so easy.
Well, especially Yard Nagoose.
Well, not even that. I mean, all these guys up front, these guys are
they
just
all
so exciting.
do, but especially him.
First, I just got to say the hat tip to Eric Sawinski for pacing yet another record-breaking race. I think this guy is just basically on speed dial for every major race director in the world.
Most likely.
And it's, hey, we need a record-breaking race. Will you pace it? And his answer is, how much money are you going to pay me? And is the flight and hotel included? So nice work, Sawinski. You did it again. You paced it perfectly and brought them through. If not for the fact that they slowed down after you dropped off, we would have had a world record, folks. World record indoor mile was on the line. He missed it by a few tenths of a second.
Literally.
Who missed it? Yared Nuguse, yet again. This is now his second American record in almost as many weeks. In
16 days.
In 16 days. And so Yared is just on fire. So running for On Athletics Club this year. And yes,
and previous podcast guys.
Yes, and you heard it. You heard it. He is just rocking and rolling with the On crew. Dathan is doing great work with him. And Yared comes out here, runs the 3,000-meter American record, just blazing fast. And then in this race in particular, he just looked like money.
I mean, his stride was fluid. He used the whole of his stride. His heel was like coming up all the way.
Andy's watching. She's like, look at his heels. And I'm like, look how fast he's running. That's what I care about. Okay, so
look at his form.
How fast did he run? That's what you want to know. First of all, he broke Bernard Lagat's indoor mile American record by 2 full seconds, nearly. It's 2 seconds off of a record mile, especially Bernard Lagat record mile. That is incredible.
Right.
Considering how many people have attempted that record too. The folks like Galen Rupp, like Cole Hocker, and whatever the other guy's name is who runs with him. I always forget his name. And so all the fast guys. Yes, thank you. Cooper Tier. All the fast guys are attempting this record in the last several years, and Yared Nuguse just blows it up. And now everyone's like, great, now I've got no chance.
So the time was 3:47.38.
Now, let me give you perspective here. First of all, he missed the world record indoor mile by 0.3. All right.
Not even.
2.2 something.
2.28.
So that's incredible. He missed the outdoor American record mile by only 0.5 of a second. Okay. So that's insane. The world record fastest ever run mile is only 4 seconds faster than what he just did. We're talking about the Hicham El Gurouch of legend. And he only ran 4 seconds slower. And an indoor mile at that. Whoa.
And at the beginning of his pro career.
I mean, yeah, Yared Nuguse is only a year and a half out of college, or a year out of college.
I'm totally geeked. Let me just geek for just a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
I am geeked because when we had Yared Nuguse on the show, we were talking about how he had qualified for the Olympic Games, and he had expressed some of his disappointment because he got injured and he couldn't run to his potential, and he couldn't run at the Olympic Games, and that was very sad for him. But he was picked up by the Scouter of the Century. I feel like Dathan Ritzenhein has the eye for talent because he has collected quite the team and then also cultivated it. And what was it? How many? 9 different national records?
His international squad is top of the line as far as track squads go.
Yeah. But I'm so excited that he picked up Yared Nuguse, and then he's Yared Nuguse. He's the golden goose, they say.
So it should be noted. Nice. It should be noted. He now, as far as Americans go, only one American has ever run a faster mile of any type, indoor or outdoor. That's Alan Webb with the American record outdoors. Yamif Kejelcha holds the current indoor world record at 3:47.01. So again, just about 4 tenths.
0.27. I get that.
0.37. And so Kejelcha is Ethiopian, and then in addition to that, in that same race, as Yared is running, as Nuguse is running, just blazing fast times, Ali Hoare ties his own record for the Australian indoor mile. And then behind him is Neil Gorley, who ran a national record as well. And Mario Garcia Romo ran a national record. Oh, Neil Gorley didn't run a national record.
But he became the 6th fastest indoor miler in history.
Yes.
Yeah.
So not a record, but 6th fastest. But Mario Garcia Romo, also of On Athletics Club, ran a Spanish national record mile. And so now you've got Dathan was 3 for 3 with records there, if you count a tie as a record. So Naguse, Hoare, and Garcia Romo all setting national records
So cool.
or tying national records. Just crazy.
Yep, and briefly, women's Wanamaker Mile was really fun to watch. Laura Muir is always a pleasure to see speed on the track, and Josette Norris, well, she's Josette Andrew, which when I saw her, I was like, why does it say Andrew on there?
Andrews? Who is Andrews?
Yeah, so that's Josette Norris, but she led much of the way, and then Laura Muir in the last little bit just
rip-roaring fashion.
Rip-roared past, and she had a
with
full-on effort finish. Like, she ran to, the max there. And then in 6th place, Centeu Vissa of On Athletic Club ran an Italian national record in 4:24.54.
So how many national records did Dathan clock in one event? 4.
No, well, in one event, yeah. Because he has more coming.
More coming. That was just in one event.
Do we want to go down to the next one?
So let's talk about the 3,000 now. Same event, but in the 3,000, just more mind-boggling. Andy, you got to do it.
All right. I fangirl over Alicia Munson. She was on the show, and I have really enjoyed following her career. And she has notched down her times, progressively getting more fierce and more competitive in events. You'll remember she was in the Olympic Games, and then in the Diamond League this past summer, she was runner-up at the Diamond League Championship.
Doing all the things right.
She's doing all the things right. So she won the entire race, but an American record time.
Just sneaks.
She snuck it.
Sneaks under the record.
Yep. 8:25.05.
So fast.
And it's 7th all-time indoor.
Yeah.
And she's number 1 for athletes born outside of Ethiopia.
Indeed that's really saying something.
Yeah.
And we should note that now we're talking about the likes of, she's bettering all of the Bowerman Track Club ladies that were running super lightning fast in the last couple of years.
Yeah, Elise Cranny was in this race, and she was, I believe, 5th place or something like that. She ran a personal best.
Yeah, people were running fast, but
yeah,
Alicia Monson just went next level.
She
just did the thing.
Next level
better
stuff.
than anybody else. Yeah.
Speaking of next level, Caitlin Toohey upped the level for NCAA.
Another NCAA record for Toohey.
She was 3rd place, and she ran a time of 8:35 to shatter, as Let's Run says, Carissa Schweitzer's previous collegiate record of 8:41.60. So how many seconds is that?
6.5 seconds off the record.
That's huge. In the 3,000?
She just basically took a scalpel, oversized it, and chopped the whole toe off. So
that is brutal.
Toohey is, and she basically made a comment that gave everyone the impression, this was in an interview recently, that she's done after this year. She's going pro. She has to. Unless she gets some kind of like major injury or something of that nature. She is best ever and doing all the things at the best level. Multiple cross-country titles. She's got records now in multiple events in the indoor track. She's going to do it in the outdoor track too. And so Caitlin Toohey is just lighting everything up, and it's incredible to see.
Mm-hmm. Lighting it up is also happening for Laura Galvin because she broke the Mexican 3,000 meter national record in this event. What place was she?
Love seeing she was 6th place in a time of 8:40, new Mexican record.
Very cool.
So as we cited it over the course of just a few events now, we've got a big handful of records. So now let's talk about the men's 3,000 because this was less exciting or at least less like touted as, like this big record-setting opportunity.
But it was really fascinating because it was a really great field, and I guess Let's Run is calling it the biggest surprise of the entire Millrose Games. It was an upset. Josh Kerr won this event. This is not his typical event.
Josh Kerr's a middle distance guy.
He's a middle
800
distance guy.
mile.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's kind of unfamiliar, and he ended up running 7:33.47, and he just looked super comfy. He was about in the middle. It strung out pretty early on, and they were just running single file, but he was about in the middle, and with the final 2 laps to go, he just powered. He just looked really comfortable.
Well,
honestly, he looked really
he's
good.
a speedster, so he's got a strong kick if he stays in it like that. And
Right. So it looks
good.
like he ran a really smart race, really well within himself, and then was able to use his strength, which is his speed, in the end there to outkick everybody in the final finish. Gordy Beamish improved his own national record in the 3,000 meter run, again, of On Athletics
It's a
Club.
New Zealand's national record. So, and some other incredible performers. I mean, Joe Klecker was in the race from On Athletics running a fast time. And then you had Luis Grijalva from Guatemala running near national record. It wasn't a national record, though. If it wasn't, it was very close. And so
I don't think so, because it wasn't next
across
to his
the
name.
board, between the mile and the 3,000 meter, we're talking about 6-7 national records. And just like outstanding racing. So exciting.
And very exciting. Speaking of exciting and people that are connected, the Dubai Marathon was a family affair, I guess. It's kind of a fun little factoid here, but the winners for both the women's and the men's marathons were related to the Eugene World Champion Marathon winner from 2022, Temirat Tola.
Temirat Tola from Ethiopia. So relatives of Tola are just winning races?
I guess there's
headline?
something going on. But let's start on the women's side. It was won by 26-year-old Dita, and she's the wife of Temirat Tola.
Cool.
Very cool.
That's quite the dynamic duo couple.
Yes, definitely. Fast runner duo. And she has run the Dubai event and was 5th and 7th previously, and this is her first marathon win.
Very
and
nice.
it was a personal best time for her, 2:21:11. And this is, like I said, her first placement better
Good
than
stuff.
5th, actually. So quite an improvement for her. She's also a mother, which, to throw that in
Andy
there,
always
is kind
likes
of fun.
that. Yep, good.
She was a 2019 World Cross Country silver medalist, and she's also super fast on the track. She broke away with about 5 minutes to go, but she did not lead for very much of this race. Like, there was a pacer, but then I think she also had a female that was ahead of her quite a bit of the way too, but then she ended up just in the last 5 minutes taking over. And then on the men's side, 22-year-old Abdisa Dula, younger brother of Temirat Tola, won the men's event.
So his wife and his brother.
His wife and his brother. And
what a family.
The way that he did it was very similar. He didn't lead until the very end, but it was more like a, I don't know, 1K in the very end.
Oh, very late.
Yeah, very
That's
late.
bold.
So it was very smooth and very calculated. And he really started to press with 5K to go. And by the 1K, he had a really big lead. So it was more 5K that he went. But he trains with his brother. To
No
be
doubt.
Noted. Yep, he
Not
trains
surprising.
with him. Yep. I wonder if his wife does too. They didn't say that. They didn't say that over
There's
the.
a decent chance.
Yeah. I also have the link to this marathon in its full, complete form. So if you'd
Watching
like to watch
exciting races.
the full marathon, you could do that. Maybe on one of your treadmill runs. Hopefully you don't have many of there's been a kind of a change of season that I hope lingers and stays here in Michigan.
At least in the Midwest, yeah.
But yeah.
It won't, Andy. It's supposed to get super cold and stuff again. I mean, it's winter. It's supposed to be
winter.
cold.
That's
All
what
right.
happens.
Well, speaking of bonus fast running, we have mentioned to you Ajay Wilson's running streak and indoor track. She has a 10-year and going win streak at the Armory.
And she's undefeated at the
Undefeated,
Armory.
yep.
Mhm.
And so she kept it alive.
She kept it alive at the Millrose Games.
And we just have to always, give the Ajay Wilson plug. If you run against Ajay Wilson, indoor track at the Armory, you're going to lose. That's it.
That very well could be the case.
Hats off to the first person who finally beats her. Or she's going to retire first, and then it's like, no one can ever beat me.
Been beaten.
I love it. All right, well, all of that to be said, if you also would like to run super fast and never get beaten at anything,
That is not a real claim, folks.
we could help you toward that direction. In principle, as we talk with so many of you, we're always looking for what can we do to be helpful and supportive. And a lot of times it's, ask questions and we'll share thoughts and try to do what we can to address whatever's on your mind. We always enjoy those conversations. So send them on. Mm-hmm. Don't hesitate. And don't feel badly if it's, you asked a question recently and you want to ask another, do it. The worst thing that can happen is we answer. So That's
not
all
too bad.
good. But if you need something a little bit more, or you're looking for some direct support in your training endeavors, we have a number of services that may fit the need, from an isolated individual consultation to training plans and coaching and customizations and such. So if any of that sounds like the thing you need at this time, head to AtoZrunning.com/coaching to take a look.
And thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.